Hi, folks. We're Tacitus today. Your pushback channel. And thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of taxation and how should the taxation system be structured to encourage innovation, competition, productivity, wealth creation. Does the tax system adequately meet those requirements currently? If there were to be changes, what should those changes to the taxation system be? Would they have to be constantly adjusted based on changing conditions or circumstances? So let's just have a look at the tax. I think that the West, I firmly believe the West has descended into a crony economy. And I'll come back in a moment and talk about how and why, but it's descended into a crony economy where, and there are various studies around on this, with 3/4 plus of all economic activity is by monopolies, oligopolies, or cartels. Now, whether you look at Australia or the United States or Britain or Canada, it doesn't really matter. It varies a little bit. Maybe 71% here and 78% in the other country, but it's overwhelmingly the competitive sector of the economy, the innovation, the engine of productivity and innovation and invention. That's being left by the wayside, and the big bucks are in cartel type profit arrangements. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's a cartel in the sense there's only one or two players, or an oligopoly, whatever you call it, where they just all raise their price at the same time, or they receive government protection or automatic guaranteed bailouts for failure and this sort of thing. The socialisation of losses and the privatisation of profits and so on. It doesn't really matter, but that's happened all across the Western world. Now, even in the 1950s and 60s, there was a lot of talk, and if you look at the various thinkers and groups, whether they be in trade unions or in private organisations that you'd say would be on the economic and political right of things, they all talked about, well, the only way to ensure the best outcome for the economy, for the business, and best prices for consumers, consumer protection, the only way you can do that is through competition. As soon as you allow a small number of players to control the market, they will inevitably through various means, will begin raising prices, controlling the market through one method or another. Now, there are various antitrust. In the United States, it's called antitrust, but it's called the anti-competition legislation in Australia, for example, where if the market becomes too concentrated just by a small handful of players, then they will again manipulate the market, manipulate prices, create artificial shortage, do whatever it takes to boost their profits. And it's a very fat and lazy way to go about things, but that's sort of how it's come. Now, if you look at the best paying jobs in Australia, they're all in monopoly and oligopoly and cartel situations. So, an organisation that's in a government protected oligopoly, the CEO is getting paid 10, 20 million bucks a year. There are many, gazillion dollar jobs that are there that are being paid to people. But inevitably, once that process begins, it's a place where political buddies of the big money end of town, no one's getting their job. No one is getting their job on merit. Nobody. They're all. So again, once you get this reduction in competition, then inevitably it leads to a crony economy. And there's a lot of people living high on the hog, who in a real world of competitive economics, they'd be lucky to have a suburban job in some bullshit accountant's office or something like that. And I've been into meetings in some of these big monopoly, oligopoly type outfits, and you get to sit down with some members of the board of directors, and you could swear you're in a kindergarten. None of them have earned their job, and they're all just well-connected socialites. Now, how did this happen? Because in some sectors of the economy, there's 7, 8, 9, 10 players in that sector of the economy. So, well, gee, that looks competitive enough. I mean, what's wrong? How can you say that's a cartel or an oligopoly or some approximation of that? Well, the ownership structuring has changed so that now the majority of the shares in all of those companies, thus the majority of positions on the board, are owned by BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard or one of these big. So there's been a massive concentration of money at the back end, not at the money not getting invested in innovation and so on. It's now a massive money laundering and influence peddling business, and they control the 10 companies in that sector, and they tell those companies what to do, who they will appoint to the board, and the decisions they make. Now, the control that these just small handful, which is in itself an oligopoly, the small handful of big money in the town have, they can get rid of any CEO or board member they want to. They're incredibly powerful, and I've seen that power up close. They can put a CEO and say, look, do this. We want you to hire 1,000 black lesbians, but look, just as a reward for doing that, we're going to make your bonus. We're going to give you a $10 million bonus if the stock price hits $50, and it's currently trading at $20. So if the stock price is, you get a $10 million bonus. The CEO, it's $10 million in the pocket for doing nothing other than hiring the black lesbians. So how are you going to do that? The CEO says, well, it doesn't matter. Our control of the market is so huge, so great. We can walk the stock price up. We can just walk it up to any number we want, any number at all. We can just walk it up because nearly all the trading and money going back and forth is run by just a handful of organisations, just round robin the cash back and forth between each other, round robin the shares back and forth, so they can walk the price up or down to anything they want. The contract, the CEO can have the stock price goes from $20 to $10. The CEO gets fired. They can walk the stock price down to $10 any time they want. There's nothing to them. So they can. This is the level of control these guys have. So the ownership is all now in the back door. So why should some two-bit socialite flunky that isn't worth a pinch of shit? Why should he or she be paid 20, 30 million, $40 million a year? Because they're fucking useless. They haven't earned it of any sort of merit, and they're just a useful little tool or pawn for the big money boys to, and also as a bit like harsh penalties will scare people. Massive rewards will also attract people. They'll have people queuing up for 1,000 miles in all directions, wanting hey, I wouldn't mind that $20 million payout for sitting around doing nothing but crawling up your ass. So it has that effect. So they've got armies of people groveling, gagging at their feet to get a piece of this easy, do nothing, super normal atomic levels of reward for doing fuck all. Now with that, if there's so many parasites now in the system who are contributing, building, and creating nothing, they're just living off the activity of others. Why should, and this is generally referred to in economics as a rentier income, R-E-N-T-I-E-R, a rentier, meaning you sit back and do nothing and watch the rent roll. So what should happen here? How can the tax system be jigged? Now, President Trump is looking at some innovative things. If the tariff income is high enough, maybe income tax is reduced or is dispensed with altogether. Should overtime or tips be taxed? And so looking at various things to try and create incentive, try and create innovation, to create productivity. Because at the moment, the entire West is stagnating and has been stagnating productivity. Firstly, because the competitive sectors of the economy are just disappearing, and secondly, mass migration. Where do you put all these illiterate third world peasants? What do you give them to do? Any job they do will be a decline in productivity from whatever existed before. So, and also, these big. And by the way, if the taxation system is to be adjusted to reward innovation and productivity, the reverse is the case now, because an organisation has a monopoly or a cartel or some form of government protection. The Western governments are going to these companies saying, "Look, you can keep your protection. You can keep your sort of monopoly profits, but you got to hire a fuckload of third world business. You got to bring them in from the third world." So they've become de facto immigration agents, and so they have to take on this vast cost of satisfying globalist policy, which again, the likes of the BlackRocks will be also pressuring to do this. The social engineering side. In return for the social engineering, we'll let you keep your monopoly, and we'll give the jobs to the socialites. Some of the socialites I've met in these CEO and board of director roles, I'm seriously, you wouldn't hire them to sweep the floor. They've never worked a fucking day in their lives. They tend to come from quite well-to-do families, it's not like they need the money. They're just on their knees gobbling, for the prestige. Anyway, coming back to the productivity side of it, if a company with monopoly is going to be taxed to a heavy, tax by 90% tax, for example, I'm not saying that it is or isn't or shouldn't be, they're going to get taxed by 90%. They got to, hey, we got to do something about this. We got to break the company up into bits. We got to become competitive. Now, once a company has to compete in the market, they hire very different people than if they don't have to compete. When they don't have to compete, they can hire 1 million black lesbians of an IQ of -5 million. They can just do that. It isn't going to affect them. The profits will just roll in the monopoly door. But when they have to compete, that's very different. Then it's a completely different person they have to hire, and a completely different attitude prevails and pervades the business. And the CEO is a different guy, the board is different, the management, so very different. And it's very much a focus on merit. We want the brightest people to come to work here, so that they put pressure on the universities. No, we want university degrees of merit. We want to know this person passed the exams, passed a rigorous process and a rigorous exam. But so that change. So it has a knock-on effect throughout the system. But as more and more monopolies and cartels and so on, oligopolies and the like take over the economy, that in turn has the other effect. We don't need people who are any good. We can hire how many low IQ black lesbians we want. It doesn't matter. Our revenues are guaranteed by the monopoly, and we just don't have to compete. So this is the sort of challenge the taxation system has. Similarly, why would somebody want a $20 million a year job if they're going to get taxed 90%, for example? They wouldn't. They're going to say, well, I want a job in a competitive sector. I don't want a crony job, because in a crony job, I'm going to be taxed by 90%, so I don't want a crony job. I want a job in the competitive sector. Well, that's fine, Billy Bob, but you have to be good enough. You have to be good enough. And you're not. You're fucking useless. You're a useless fucking parasite socialite, and you can't get those sort of jobs. So this is how the forces that are unleashed in the economy once you start looking. But who decides? It's a bit like this, I suppose. Who decides on what who should be euthanized or something? It's who decides what someone who's got the job on competitive terms or merit based. Who determines so there needs to be a completely transparent structure for that identifies, well, this is a banking and finance, for example, insurance. These are things where the senior executives have the shit taxed out of them because they're not doing anything. Pretty much all the legislation just delivers the revenue into their front door, and they've just got to sit there and count the money as it comes in. It's not a tough gig. So, which is why it's given to compliant, flunky, useless, do nothing socialites. So this is the challenge. But I think the taxation system should be restructured or structured for the sole purpose of, not forgetting equity, by the way. You don't tax people everything they earn, but for the purposes of how can we increase productivity, how can we give a disincentive to monopolies and oligopolies and cartels, and how can we create a competitive, vibrant economy where merit matters. You've been fantastic today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.